Hello and welcome to this panel entitled From the Fab to the Future about how Japan and its partners are working towards semiconductor resilience and innovation. My name is David Keohane and I'm the Financial Times Tokyo correspondent. I see my role in this conversation is as being in charge of getting all of the panelists talking. They know more than I do, and I'd like to get that conversation started as soon as possible. But I also hope to get everyone watching involved too. So with that in mind, a tiny bit of admin. If you're viewing this live on the Nikkei channel or YouTube Live, please note that we welcome your questions. You can submit questions by scrolling down to the submission link below. If you could include, the company you work for or the institution or title when submitting, that'd be great. So to start, I think it's really quite difficult to overestimate the importance of the semiconductor industry, and it's what makes this panel particularly exciting to be part of. Semiconductors underpin a massive and growing part of our modern economy. It's a technology that rivals oil and gas for both its importance and the attention it receives from policymakers, politicians, the world's companies. It's also central to the world's biggest geopolitical story because, in a twist, worthy of perhaps a badly written movie, the world's most valuable technology is located almost entirely, at least at the leading edge, in one of the world's most geopolitically sensitive areas, which for a journalist makes it particularly great. This panel will try to dissect some of the most important trends in the industry and ask what Japan and its allies are doing to improve the sector's resilience and its ability to keep growing, to keep innovating, as the title says. We have the perfect panel to discuss this. So I'm delighted to be joined by, first, Mr. Bruce Andrews, Senior Vice President and Chief Government Affairs Officer at Intel. Andrew leads Intel's Global Government Affairs Group and oversees the company's government affairs and public policy functions and strategies. He has more than 30 years of public policy and government relations experience. Prior to Intel, he served as a senior vice president and managing partner, co-leading global government affairs at SoftBank, Japan's SoftBank Group. Next up, we have Ms. Kristy Tsun, director of the Taiwan ASEAN Studies Center, Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research, a leading non-profit, policy-orientated economic research institute in Taiwan. Her research institutes include Southeast Asian Study, Regional Economic Integration, International Trade Policy and Economic Trade Law, and recently a focus on supply chain resilience and economic security issues. She was a visiting fellow at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy in Seoul, South Korea, and the Washington, D.C.-based Wilson Center, where she published a series of publications on a U.S. strategy on semiconductor supply chains. Next up, we have Professor Yasuyuki Todo, who's professor at the Graduate School of Economics at Waseda University since 2014, after serving as the department head of the Department of International Studies at the University of Tokyo. He's also a program director and faculty fellow at the Research Institute of Economy, Trade, and Industry. His research fields are international economics, development economics, and applied microeconometrics. And he's one of the leading economists and supply chain researchers globally. He's published multiple books, including on semiconductor supply chains. So we're in good hands. To start this off, and before we get to kind of a general discussion, we'll be dividing this into three pieces. The first will be a short presentation by each of our panelists, then a discussion between us here, and then we'll bring you guys in for as much Q&A as possible. So if I could get Bruce to kick off the short presentations from each of our panelists, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, David, thank you so much for having us tonight or today for this important discussion. So you really hit the nail on the head, which is the semiconductor industry has become one of the world's most important and critical technologies. Where the oil reserves had defined, the last 50 or 60 years of history, where the fabs are is going to be even more important going forward. And, traditionally, the United States had been the biggest leader in semiconductor design and innovation, with companies like Intel, AMD, Qualcomm, and NVIDIA at the forefront. However, the manufacturing of semiconductors has increasingly shifted to Asia, particularly Taiwan, South Korea, China, and now Japan trying to be more competitive. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we really discovered the significant vulnerabilities in the global semiconductor supply chain, leading to shortages that affected a number of industries. I mean, you think about the number of automobiles that were sitting around on car lots not being able to be delivered because they were missing a 50-cent microchip. And I think it really highlighted the fragility of the global supply chain and industry. And, as you mentioned, geopolitical tensions have also impacted this. And with the significant concentration of semiconductor manufacturing in Asia, it's really raised concerns, about how do we make sure there is a resilient global supply chain. And one of the challenges of this industry is the high cost of research and development and manufacturing. I mean, the CapEx expenditures for building a fab are extraordinary. The costs of staying on the leading edge of technology development are just staggering. And so this industry has taken up an increased importance, but also recognizing that the economics of it can be quite challenging. And that's where the CHIPS Act came in, which is, in 1990, the United States was 37% of the global semiconductor manufacturing. Europe was 44%. Now that's 12% and 9% respectively. As you mentioned, Intel is the only leading edge manufacturer in the United States. And so what the CHIPS Act was designed to do is to really help fill the significant cost gap between manufacturing in Asia and manufacturing in the United States by incentivizing domestic manufacturing, research, and development. And I think if you talk to the companies, because of all the subsidies and the policies that have been carried out in Asia over the last 30 years, Asia's just developed a remarkably extensive ecosystem, but B, the cost of manufacturing there because of all the subsidies and other advantages that are held because of that provides a huge advantage. And so the CHIPS Act really steps up and authorizes substantial federal funding to support the industry, particularly manufacturing and R&D. So this includes grants, subsidies, tax incentives to encourage companies to construct and expand the U.S.-based industry, and particularly facilities, and fund semiconductor research and development. The act includes also provisions for workforce training and education to address the skills gap in the semiconductor industry, which is something that not only is being faced acutely in the United States, but in countries around the world. And by providing these incentives, the Act really aims to increase the domestic semiconductor production capacity, reduce reliance on foreign suppliers, and enhance the global competitiveness of the U.S. industry. So what has been the impact of the CHIPS Act? And really, the CHIPS Act represents a first strategic effort by the U.S. government to really revitalize the domestic industry. And this is probably the biggest piece of industrial policy in the United States, really since the Second World War. And in an attempt to address the supply chain vulnerabilities and maintain technological research, or I'm sorry, leadership. And so by providing these incentives, the act aims to ensure that the U.S. remains a key player in the global semiconductor market. And what I think is so interesting about it is, the CHIPS Act was only $52.7 billion. I say only because I think at the time people thought that is a huge number. But what it has done is unlocked hundreds of billions of dollars in investments. By the estimate of the Semiconductor Industry Association, already $500 billion or $500 billion worth of new investments have been announced in the semiconductor industry in the United States. And so, this effort to help the US play catch up with the rest of the world, particularly while other countries are also continuing to try to enhance the competitiveness of their industries. For example, there was a story today about Korea passing new incentives. India is aggressively trying to get into the semiconductor manufacturing game. The EU passed its own CHIPS Act, and Japan, I saw a story this morning, I think probably in your publication, saying how Japan is talking about spending $65 billion. The prime minister would like to spend $65 billion in the coming years. And so this all comes at a time where supply chains are all being examined to build more resiliency, to really spread out so that we don't end up in a situation where they were as critically exposed as we learned in COVID. And a number of countries in the developing world are really trying to capture part of the semiconductor supply chain and value chain. And this comes at a time where we're seeing surging demand and growth in sectors like automotive, 5G, IoT, AI, and data centers, which has increased the demand for semiconductors. The global semiconductor industry or market is expected to grow from $529 billion in 2023 to over $1 trillion by 2030. And to meet this market growth, the industry is investing heavily in manufacturing and in R&D. And you had mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk more extensively about the trade tensions between the U.S. and China, which has been a real challenge for global companies to have to navigate because it creates a challenging geopolitical environment for those of us who operate, not only in the United States, but also, China is one of the biggest semiconductor markets in the world in a critical part of every major semiconductor company's revenue stream. So everybody is looking at how do we do more localization of semiconductor production and to diversify supply chains to really reduce the dependency, particularly on Asia. So one of the things you asked is what is the political situation in Washington? And obviously, last week was a very big deal in that regard. The election of President Trump, bringing in a new administration, is going to be a substantial change. Now, I would remind everybody that the CHIPS Act was actually originally envisioned under President Trump. People often forget that Trump was a big part. His administration played a big role in the creation of the CHIPS Act. Now, it was passed under the Biden administration, but it really began and got a lot of its running room during the Trump administration. And it's been very interesting to watch the Trump transition because in 2016, they really, I think, were almost caught by surprise by winning, whereas this transition has been remarkably impressive. It's highly professional. It's much faster than we've seen. I mean, the fact that we've already seen a number of the key members of President Trump's his economic or national security cabinet is truly impressive at the speed and scope. And they're professionals. These are, Senator Rubio is an example, somebody who is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, but has deep experience in these issues. And I think, one of the things that will be interesting is, we're now going to see for the first time in a while, full Republican control of Washington. So controlling the House, controlling the Senate, and controlling the White House. And, some people have said, will there be changes made to the CHIPS Act? And obviously, that's something that the president and Congress will have to decide. But I think it's worth remembering how bipartisan the passage of the CHIPS Act was. Senators like Senator Cornyn, Senator Young from Indiana played a key role in helping to get the CHIPS Act passed and help to make it successful. And one of the things is the projects that are going to be funded are in districts of both Democrats and Republicans. And actually, interestingly, more of the big projects, for example, like our Ohio project, are actually in the districts, the congressional districts and states of Republican representatives. Often Democrats and Republicans in Congress differ on some of the tools. I think we'll see a continued focus and a continued support for taking significant effort to support this industry because it's not only an economic security issue, but you'll hear many of them talk about how they view it as a national security issue as well. So let me stop there and let some of my colleagues take a turn here, and I look forward to the questions that people have.
That was great. Thank you. And lots to dig into in a little bit. Kristy, would you like to step up next?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Davey, and thank you, Bruce, and thank Nikkei for having me here. It's really a very timely occasion to talk about the semiconductor. You probably don't believe that in Taiwan this week and last week, we had more than 30 events discussing debating this US election result and this Trump 2.0. And the TSMC, which is open targeted, and the company is investing hugely in the US, include a total $65 billion US dollars is right now talking about this TSMC 2.0. We also in Taiwan discussed about this and China Plus One strategy 2.0. So it seems everything needs to have an updated version to cope with the new political strategic situation. So having said that, I think the positive development is that, as Bruce has just mentioned, that at a global perspective, global semiconductor sector has experienced several booms and significant fluctuations in 2020. But right now, we see a very positive trend, which is the rise of artificial intelligence and 5G technology is driving strong growth, especially when we see strong sales in the third quarter of 2024, and sales are especially strong in the Americas and China. And for Taiwan, just a little background for Taiwan in terms of developing a semiconductor sector. Taiwan has walked a long way in developing semiconductor and spending the past 50 years building up a comprehensive ecosystem in Taiwan from the north, the central, and now in South Taiwan. In Taiwan, the semiconductor supply chain consists of IC design. We have around 300 design house and fabrication, meaning chip making, and assembly, test, and packaging. And equally important is the application sector, including the consumer electronics as well as machinery and other things that Taiwan manufactures in this island. So yes, indeed, Taiwan is thriving in the AI boom with TSMC and major manufacturers of AI servers, CoWoS, meaning a multi-chip packaging technology, all reaping profits from soaring AI chip demand. And it is believed that AI boom is bringing Taiwan another golden decade of its semiconductor sector. However, there are people who feel very much worried and also very much pessimistic in Taiwan because we do see a lot of very new development of this global strategic and also very complicated political situation. But in the past 2 years, Taiwan is witnessing significant shifting trends of its chip trade and investment. As an export-oriented economy, semiconductor continue to account for more than 40% of Taiwan's total export, exporting around $250 billion per year. And most advanced chip, including 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer, and 3 nanometer, are now shipping to the United States. And this makes Taiwan the second largest chip import source for the US, accounting for around 20% of its total chip imports. So we believe while US is needing all these very advanced chip, and Taiwan is probably the only exporter that can provide quality as well as affordable chip, and they may even bring Taiwan and US even closer under this demand and supply partnership. And US, we see from its trade data, is also importing less and less chips from China, suggesting gradual decoupling of semiconductor supply chain is really taking place. And more significantly is semiconductor companies from Taiwan and some other countries are actively investing not only at home, but also across the world, mostly in advanced countries and G7 members, including in the States, Japan, and now in Germany, and expanding to Central and Eastern European countries. In Asia, Taiwan and other chip makers are also heavily investing in Southeast Asia, such as in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Vietnam, Philippines, as well as in India. And these new trends of semiconductor supply chain relocating and expanding from Taiwan or certain Asian countries into different continents and regions reflect the supply chain diversifying and de-risking, as Bruce has already suggested. The positive side is less impact when disruption of supply chain occurs, but it also means overcapacity, more and redundant investment, higher costs, lower efficiency, and increasing risk in terms of protection of intellectual property rights and trade secrets, supply chain management, and also compliance issues such as export control. Just a very timely example for you. If the US is going to adopt more restrictive and broader export control measures after the president-elect Donald Trump takes office in January next year, a lot of newcomers in this industry and in some developing countries will have problems to comply with the very complicated rules. And therefore, building up new fabs and new factories are one thing. The subsequent management of the operations are even more challenging than just investing huge money into the infrastructure. So just to respond to what Bruce has mentioned about the importance of local government support, yes, this subsidy is very important because it can bring down the cost, which is very, very significant when building up a new fab. But in Taiwan's case, apart from this local government support, the other things are also equally important, which include the local customer support, because you need to have the market. Market is the one that can drive the operations and make them sustainable and also successful. And the second thing, which is often often highlighted, is the completeness of infrastructure that includes transportation, energy, and nowadays it's talking about this green energy and also water resource. Water resource is extremely important. When I go to India, I also share with them the importance of water resource if they want to build up their own semiconductor supply chain. And also supply chain soundness, meaning supporting industry. In Taiwan, we have design, IC design. We have test and packaging. We have fabrication. But right now in Taiwan, we still need our materials and equipment. And therefore, all these things putting together can create some sound supply chain, which will be very, very important. And also adequate talent supply. I believe this is very much addressed by everyone who wants to attract more talents into their supply chain. But right now, the world is actually searching and fighting for talents, and mostly from some developing countries like the Philippines and also Vietnamese are always targeted for the talents and also the cost. So I think that with all these components, plus the local government policy, which means, for example, the US CHIP Act and also European version CHIP Act will be all necessary for a newcomer, a new country to start with its own supply chain. And also extremely important right now is this energy issue. For example, while Taiwan is thriving and benefited from this AI boom, but we are also facing challenges in terms of these data centers. This supercomputer in Taiwan invested by, for example, NVIDIA, is consuming a lot of electricity. That means that we are facing electricity price going up and also energy issues. So I think that will also bring a lot of issues that we don't expect. So when we discuss this semiconductor supply chain, we have to take all this together into consideration. So I think I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very good demonstration of how complicated this subject is, and I think we need to unpack all of that. That was great. Thank you very much. Todo Sensei, you're our last panelist. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, David. I think I have a slide, so please show my slides. So, by the way, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting and meaningful webinar. In this slide, the QR code on the left side is the link to this the slides for today. So if you're interested, you can download them. So can you go to the next slide, please? So everybody talking about China decoupling and national security, economic security issues. But despite of decoupling and de-risking policies, actually many Asian countries are still heavily rely on China in supply chain. So that's what I want to emphasize. So this figure is showing the share of China in imports of electric machinery and electronics. And you can easily see that many Asian countries are increasing their reliance on China. Japan is kind of stagnant, but still the level is quite high. However, if you look at the U.S. Drastically reduced its reliance on China since 2018, the beginning of the U.S.-China trade war. Next slide, please. And this one is showing the exports of semiconductor-related products, which is a very essential to national security concerns. like semiconductor machinery and integrated circuits to China from Japan and the US. You can see that machinery exports of Japan to China are increasing rapidly recently. And for the US, you can see that exports of integrated circuits and semiconductor machinery declined until last year, but recently is a bit increasing. So actually, exports of semiconductor-related products from Japan and the US to China did not decline compared with a pre-decoupling period. So I'm afraid this actually poses a threat to national security. Next slide, please. And this situation, where we rely heavily on China, results in vulnerable supply chains, as we expect. This is shown by my simulation study using a very rich firm-level data for 1 million companies and 4 million supply chain types in Japan. And in this study, we found that when imports from China reduced by 80% for 2 months, then 40% of value-added production of Japan would be lost. So this is a huge effect because the effect of import disruption is magnified through domestic supply chains. Next slide, please. We also found that the effect of import disruption of more upstream products like machinery, metal products, plastic or chemical products would be larger because of, again, the propagation through domestic supply chains. So this implies that disruption of semiconductors and materials and machinery for semiconductor productions, which are in the upstream in supply chains, may have a huge effect. Next slide, please. So what should we do? So as already mentioned earlier, diversification is very important. So many economic studies found that internationally diversified supply chains are quite resilient. For example, this study by Japanese scholars found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, exports of countries importing inputs from more diversified countries were less affected by supply chain disruptions. Next slide, please. So based on these observations and evidence, I'd like to suggest 3 things. One is friendshoring, as always, but friendshoring has several barriers, so that we are still relying heavily on China. So one barrier is that private sector's low perception of risks of supply chain disruptions, probably because of myopia and also status quo bias. So in that case, the government needs to collect information about such risks due to national security issues and provide it to the private sector. Another barrier is the uncertainty of decoupling and de-risking policies. So, we are talking about the small yard and high fence, but actually the yard is expanding and not well predictable to private companies. So in the case of the governments need to provide more detailed information about policy directions clearly. Next slide, please. And the second policy suggestion is to promote international research collaboration among like-minded countries, in addition to supply chains expansion, which I call knowledge friendshoring. One of my studies found that actually international research collaboration can promote quality of innovation of private companies, as shown in this figure. And you can see that the effect of international collaboration is much larger than the domestic collaboration, implying that through international research collaboration, private companies can learn new knowledge that is not available domestically. Next slide, please. So finally, I would like to suggest to implement industry policy more effectively. So far, as far as I understand, the current industrial policy of Japan has been successful due to regional development around TSMC in Kyushu and international research collaboration among Rapidus, LSTC, and foreign firms and institutions like Intel's. So through these two channels, productivity spills over through regional and international networks, which is very good for the Japanese economy. So so far, so good. However, historically, we often observe that the prolonged industrial policy leads to inefficiency in the market economy and may fail. So for larger and long-lasting effectiveness, policies should target more firms and maintain competition within the industry. And also policies should promote knowledge flows by supporting information collection and business matching between firms and universities, for example. So that's it for my presentation. I want to expand more in the discussion part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The complication for a moderator in these situations is knowing where to start, because there's a lot to go through there. Just leading on from what Todo Sensei was saying, I mean, he's described a situation where you almost have a bifurcation in terms of what one might view as a trade war, where you still have, I think, you have a lot of restrictions on leading edge machinery going into China, but you have kind of some firms maybe doing quite well exporting less advanced machinery and tools. And then adding that to what Bruce was saying about how the one subject in America where everyone is aligned is chips and China. It's a rare political zone which seems there is a right or wrong answer. You feel policy-wise that this so-called chip war will probably get more deeply entrenched, and the trends that we're seeing will probably accelerate. Could you guys, and maybe I'll start with you, Bruce, if you don't mind, where do you see this going? I mean, as in just from a high level point of view, I mean, if we come back in a year's time, what is your best guess to the situation we would be facing then?
That is a very good question.
Sorry.
I would be in Vegas playing roulette if I actually could answer that question well, or doing something where I'd be making money off it. I mean, look, this is a remarkably complicated, because one thing I would probably, I don't know if I'd say take issue with, but I think I would say slightly differently. So I actually don't think it is a trade war, because I think a lot of this is based on national security concerns. And, in recent years, national security has become defined much more broadly. And one of the previous speakers said, the small yard, high fence has become a bigger yard over the course of time. And, if you talk to U.S. national security officials, they believe that these are dual-use technologies that could be used potentially by China in military ways. And if you talk to Chinese leaders, they would tell you that they believe that the U.S. is over defining in terms of national security, and that that some of this is being used to hold down the Chinese economy. So there's two kind of, I wouldn't call them diametrically opposed, but two very different takes on what is going on in the world. And I think, with President Trump, I've got to admit, I can't tell you where I think he's going to take this. I do think his policies are going to be, quite influential in where this ends up in a year. I think, and I would put them in two ways. One is how he pursues export control policies, because the Biden administration has definitely issued a whole lot of new export controls. And then the second is tariffs. Candidate Trump talked a great deal about tariffs, on China and more general tariffs. And it really will depend on what does he do with that. Does he come in and, because I do think if he were to impose, let's say, the 60% tariffs that he discussed in the campaign, I think you would see significant reaction from the Chinese side. And so, there's a lot of variables that play here that make this very challenging. I can tell you from an industry perspective, and I think I speak very broadly across the industry, we're hoping that the two sides can work well together. Because this is a global industry. It's not it's not one. Our supply chains run across multiple countries, and so it's quite challenging. And but I do think this is it's going to be significantly influenced by the policies that you know, that how President Trump pursues it. So give me a couple months and I'll have a better answer for you.
It's entirely fair. Would anyone else like to take a swing at that or add any points to what Bruce is saying? If not, I might ask one more question just on that front, which is you said something which I thought was very interesting, which is, you know, that a lot of this comes down to high cost of R&D and the question of skills gap. This is a question for, maybe Kristy can jump in on as well with TSMC in mind, is it really possible to replicate what the big foundry companies have done, TSMC, Intel, Samsung? I mean, the idea of starting supply chains in other countries is how realistic do we actually think that is? Because if it was just a question of money, you know, it seems to me that this isn't a problem that nation states can solve. It seems to me this is something that there's some secret sauce here that I personally don't understand, but I'd be fascinated to hear your opinion on.
Yeah, I think that is a great question because we talk about this question for the past 4 years. And to be honest, people here in Taiwan have been very much concerned and resistant to see TSMC putting all this capital in different countries, especially for very much advanced chip, because TSMC's investment in Japan and Germany are more legacy chip, but in the US, it's most advanced chip. So it took Taiwan for 2 or 3 years to come to almost consensus or agreement that TSMC or other critical suppliers in the supply chain need to go out for several reasons. First is the US has been Taiwan's largest customer, largest market, and therefore, and also it holds a lot of technology for Taiwan, and therefore TSMC and all other suppliers have to follow suit. And the second thing is while relocating, we now use relocating is relocating. So by relocating the supply chain from Taiwan to US and also to other countries, we are actually expanding or extending our supply chain to serve directly the customers there in the US and to build more trusted relation. And the third is very important is in Taiwan, we do see increasing challenges in terms of workforce, in terms of capital, human resource capital, in terms of water, in terms of electricity, and also we do have a lot of natural disasters like earthquake and all this. And therefore, by putting some of the supply chain to other countries where our most important markets are actually reducing the pressure here for electricity, for example, energy challenges for the whole sector. So right now we come to support TSMC going there. However, there are also concerns that whether TSMC's investment in Arizona may reach or may achieve what it really wants. Fortunately, they didn't go well in the past 2 years because of this union thing, this trade union thing. And right now, they are actually moving very smoothly. I believe that they are going to have a very important ceremony where they will invite Trump, where they will invite whether it's a president already or it's president-elect. So right now, TSMC's investment in the US and also in Japan are pretty much smooth, which is very positive sign for this kind of concern.
Todo Sensei, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so can I add from a perspective of Japan, which is a kind of a backward country in terms of semiconductor. So basically, for the semiconductor production to be successful, of course, money or investment is one big factor, but it's not enough. Obviously, technology is more important than money. And in that sense, fortunately, as I mentioned earlier in the last slide, TSMC is actually bringing, of course, legacy chips, but still high technology from a Japanese perspective. And in addition, other companies like material company, machinery companies, and user companies are agglomerating or around TSMC so that they are exchanging the technology and knowledge and information. This actually promotes, this improves the productivity of all of these firms. So that's actually key to the success. So in that case, another example in Japan is, of course, Rapidus. And in the case of Rapidus, actually the Japanese government encouraged international research collaboration with Rapidus and Intel and so forth. So in that sense, that kind of collaboration promotes the technology in Rapidus and also LSTC. So that's why I'm currently, at least currently, optimistic about the future of Japanese semiconductor production. Thank you.
Actually, considering just keeping an eye on the time, I think we might try and start the Q&A session in about 10 minutes. I would like to concentrate a little bit on Rapidus, actually. And I think just for the benefit of listeners or audience members who are unfamiliar with Japan or Rapidus, it's Japan's kind of government-sponsored effort to kickstart production, leading edge chip production, in Japan. And the way I've thought about Rapidus, and it's the question I'd like to ask is, if Japan can't do it, can anyone? I mean, you've got a geopolitical confluence of where everyone is kind of pushing because they want this to happen. You have a country that had a very deep semiconductor industry, like a dominant position through the 80s and 90s, and still has companies with large niche positions in tools, equipment, and manufacturing. And then you have this effort to kickstart 2-nanometer chip production, foundry. I suppose my question: how important do you think Rapidus is? Does the industry view it as a way to de-risk kind of the concentration of the foundry business? Sorry, Todo-sensei, yeah. If you would you mind starting with that one? I'd be interested in your point of view. I should have nominated somebody.
Yeah. So of course, there's uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty in the future of Rapidus. But again, as long as productivity can improve through like a research collaboration, there's a hope. But one concern is that now the Japanese government is focusing on only one company, Rapidus. So, but historically, for example, TSMC was not one of them. One of the, the Taiwanese government did not focus only TSMC, but actually there was a competition among other companies, Taiwanese companies with TSMC. So through this kind of competition, actually TSMC invested a lot in R&D activities and then improved the productivity. So this kind of competition may be necessary in the process of industry development. So if you look at Samsung also, there was a kind of a competition among other Korean companies at the very beginning. So we need to think about it in the long run. I mean, we still need some kind of a kickstart, like a huge subsidies initially, but in the long run, we need to have a competition with other companies too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to extend that question to Kristy and Bruce, I suppose what gives people hope with Rapidus is that it has an ecosystem here. When you look at other countries that might try and develop kind of chip production or chip supply chains, there is, I think, a chicken and egg problem. Can you just implant one single bit of the supply chain into a country and expect that to work, or do you need the design, the product, the whole lot? And how do you actually go about starting that?
Sure. So I'm happy to take a shot at it. So I have to admit, I don't know a lot specifically about Rapidus, but here's what I can tell you, which is building leading edge semiconductors is really hard. It's incredibly technologically difficult. It is incredibly capital intensive. It requires a huge amount of expertise. And I can speak from the Intel example, which is, we had for 50 years been the leader. We had a small stumble when we're going from 10 nanometers to 7 nanometers because we didn't make the jump to EUV lithography, the time we probably should have. We thought we could go to lower nanometer levels without jumping the technology. And ironically, ASML, probably wouldn't exist without Intel. Intel was a key backer. At one point, we owned 40%. We helped fund the company. But when the time came, we made a decision to continue on an older set of technologies to go one more jump from 10 to 7 nanometers, where TSMC made what turned out to be a smart decision to use EUV lithography for that conversion. So we stumbled. We didn't, we were not able to make that jump from 10 to 7 in an economical way. So since then, what we've done is we've instituted, when Pat Gelsinger, our CEO, came in, we did what we call our 5 nodes in 4 years, which is essentially we went 5 successive nodes over a 4-year period, which is, even for a company that had been doing this and been the global leader for 50 years, that's still really hard. And as you see right now, Intel, TSMC, Samsung are all working to get sub 2 nanometer, but everybody is finding this ain't easy, right? Samsung has publicly announced that, they've had challenges in their delays. There's all kinds of talk about where the TSMC process is. Intel, we've achieved what we were trying to achieve, but this is really difficult. So if you're a company like Rapidus that you haven't been doing this for years, and all of a sudden you're trying to do something that's, even if you've had a great deal of experience, you've been on a linear path, ain't easy. It's going to be challenging. So that's not a specific answer, but I think it gives you a general context of what is the remarkably significant challenge that they are facing.
That's very helpful. Kristy, can I just ask, I'm going to jump to Q&A in 2 minutes, but just I have 1 or 2 questions myself, using moderator's privilege to keep you guys to myself for 2 seconds. One is, you guys talk a lot about the skills gap, and I think that plays into what Bruce was saying. And I think, Japan does have a kind of a well of experienced engineers to draw on that maybe left the country and they might come back. But when you see that skill gap more globally, I mean, how do you close that, and how long does it take? I mean, presumably we're talking years. It's not a simple fix.
Well, actually, right now, that's the headache for everyone because TSMC in the past 2 years already sent out expatriates, more than 2,000 well-trained engineers to support their operations in the US, in Japan, and also in Germany. And right now, they have to bring in more students from Southeast Asian countries, from other developing countries, and also a lot of interns from Central and Eastern European countries to work for them so that they can continue to work. So that kind of skills gap is really something very, very, very critical and challenging. But the good part is right now, German government, including the local government, state government, and also in Japan, the central government, and also the state government, they came to Taiwan and then establish either curriculum or all kinds of program with different universities, different institutions in Taiwan. So that kind of joint education has already been going on. I think that, but it still takes time. So in that program is going to be successful, and also TSMC is successfully bring up the salary level in Japan, which is good, but which also caused a lot of criticism. So I think it will take some time. But as long as people, especially a young generation, is willing, interested in working in this industry, I think they will have good chance to bring a lot of new talents.
Thank you. That's very helpful. One more question for me. We talk a lot about the concentration risk in fabs at the top of the chain. I mean, it seems to me, especially sitting in Japan, there's a lot of concentration risk in terms of, you know, tools, testing, packaging. Is that something that the industry is looking at as well? I mean, there are companies that have like 100% position in some very key critical technologies. Um, I, I I don't know if anyone has a particular opinion on this. I can, Kristy, you're not on mute, so if you want to jump in again, that'd be very kind. But if anyone else would like to weigh in on that as well, I'd be interested.
Yeah, I think people also now, right now, discussing about the importance of this in testing packaging, especially for advanced testing packaging, because it happened in the US that even people thought that even TSMC successfully mass produced its most advanced chip there, if there is no investment or capacity for advanced testing packaging, that means TSMC will have to ship all these chips back home to Asia for doing this and then going back. So fortunately, right now, TSMC is collaborating with a company to do the advanced testing packaging there. I believe that while there are so many, I believe there are more than 100 fabs being built or already be built, there is a need of this testing packaging, especially for tailor-made advanced testing packaging. In that regard, not only Taiwan but also other countries can play an important role.
Bruce, you took yourself off mute. Do you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, no, I was just going to go back to the point I made earlier, which is, look, all these companies, we all face remarkably extensive global supply chains. And I think one of the things that gets forgotten is no one country can actually do everything with regards to the supply chain. We're all interconnected. There's, I can't actually think of an industry that there are more key players, that are involved in it. And then, and less so is a primary supplier, but a lot of this goes back through China as well. So you've really you've got 5 or 6 key countries that no one country can do everything in the global supply chain, and so it really does create a fairly complicated situation, and one that we're all very interdependent on each other.
Thank you. I should jump into the Q&A. It's unfair of me to dominate, but we've one question here from a consultant in the US who asks, given the substantial investments required for building factories and infrastructure, how can the industry secure stability and confidence for these significant financial commitments in an increasingly unpredictable global environment? I suppose a question of capital gap. If anyone would like to take that, please take yourselves off mute, or I can unfairly nominate someone. Why don't we, Todo Sensei had his hand up, and please, we come to you afterwards, Kristy, if that's okay.
Yeah, so this is very important question, and so here the problem is that unpredictability, right? So particularly, obviously, demand for chips should be increasing in the future, but one unpredictability arises from political uncertainties, right? So in that sense, the private companies should collaborate with the governments very closely and try to get information from the government in terms of national security concerns and so forth. So I think in this area, semiconductor industry, the collaboration linkage between private companies and the government is quite important to foresee the future. So that's one way to solve this uncertainty. And,
which I suppose what we're seeing in Japan as well, Todo Sensei. We're seeing that dynamic in Japan.
Right, but I think still it's not very sufficient. And so that now I think that's one reason why the exports of semiconductor machinery from Japan to China is still increasing. Of course, as you mentioned, maybe we are just exporting legacy machinery, but still it can be a concern. Also, actually, the total exports from Japan to China declined a lot recently, like a 23% decline for 2 years. So that's a huge decline from economic profits perspective. So that may be because of kind of information symmetry in terms of national security concerns, or like a I mean, trade restrictions in terms related to national security issues. So I think we need to solve these uncertainties as much as possible.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Kristy, did you want to jump in on that question as well?
Yeah, I think TSMC is a very unique case because TSMC very strong stock in our market. I think I was told that 30% of Taiwan population holds TSMC stock. So for this company, no problem for getting funding. But for other smaller chip makers like the second largest, the UMC, and also Vanguard, they have to depend on grants, for example, subsidy from local government. For example, UMC announced a big investment project in Singapore, $7.5 billion US, because they get Singapore government's funding. So I think that for a lot of companies, smaller scale, I mean, it's very important for them to secure their funding. And there are also companies that cannot get secure their funding, and they are not very successful. And also, I just want to touch upon a bit about this test and packaging. Test and packaging used to be very much focused in Taiwan, or some in Malaysia, some in China, because in advanced country, it's always their labor law, for example, and also their very strong labor union will be very, very critical, even more critical than to a fabricator for a test and packaging company to go. But right now, because TSMC is going, and therefore Taiwan's largest test and packaging company like ASE is also following suit. So gradually by that, we believe that TSMC will be successful in bringing a lot of suppliers, and then to form probably not an ecosystem so far, but at least a cluster in these countries.
Okay, that's very helpful again. Thank you. We have another question here from an academic in South Korea, who asks, why did TSMC select locations such as Kyushu, or Rapidus selected its location in Hokkaido? And then why did other companies, including TSMC, I suppose, select other regions in the US? What makes these geographies significant, and how do they influence companies' location decisions? Would anyone like to volunteer for that one? Kristy, please go ahead.
It's designed by their local partner. So the location, the decision of the location in Japan, also in Dresden, is the discussion after TSMC comes out their partner, their business partner. And then why they choose to invest in Arizona? There are different opinions. So far, we don't know, because the TSMC never tell us why they choose to invest in Arizona.
Thought you were just going to say money and leave it at that, but okay, fine. Bruce, you had your you took yourself off mute. Do you want to answer that as well? Or?
No, I was just going to say, well, no, and I apologize because my my screen froze up. But I think actually, interestingly enough, one of the biggest reasons I think that TSMC actually invested in Arizona is we've already built out an ecosystem and training there. And what's interesting is, the companies tend to cluster together. I mean, obviously, Silicon Valley is the best example of a innovation cluster. But Intel, we've successfully, established Arizona, and so the Arizona government went out and recruited TSMC. But a big part of why TSMC came is we built the job training programs with Arizona State and Maricopa County Community College. We have suppliers already there. So it was actually a very interesting, we're going to follow an established player and sort of grab onto it. And then obviously that, Arizona was willing to offer, you said the money, which is often the case. But, Arizona was willing to offer generous subsidies to TSMC, as others have everywhere, because I think that's the industry standard. And, I think Taiwan was probably one of the places that that really started it, but now everywhere, and I think everywhere that's now become the norm. That's how you attract investment.
Just one supplementary on that, Bruce. Do you guys Intel see like TSMC then as infringing in Arizona, or is it like a rising tide lifts all boats? As in, the larger the cluster, the greater demand. It's not zero sum.
No, not at all. It's not zero sum. And look, one of the things that it will do, which is actually positive, is it will bring more suppliers, and so it will help bring down the cost for all of us. I mean, it's one of the benefits of having co-location of different companies together is you actually end up getting the economies of scale. So if suppliers decide, hey, if there's only one company there, I may not move there, but if there's two customers there, that significantly enhances their incentive to actually follow and be there. So we do see the benefits. Now, what it has done is two things. One is Maricopa County, and this isn't just TSMC, but Maricopa County it has 14 major construction projects going on. So it's skyrocketed the cost of construction. And this is a issue across, really across many countries, but definitely in the United States, where the shortage of skilled tradespeople, particularly some of these very precise skills that are required for building a fab. So in the building trades, and then the second piece of it is the competition for talent, because even though, we have developed partnerships with the local educational institutions, we've set up job training programs. There's still a pretty intense competition for talent as people come out of those schools as well. But I would put those in the category of high class problems.
Nicely put. Thank you very much. There's two questions I might put together here. One's from an electronics professional in the Philippines, another from a policymaking person in policymaking in Japan. The first being, given declining population pressures in Japan, will Southeast Asian countries have opportunities there to contribute more to the local ecosystem? And the second question is, what steps should the Yashiba administration take to support semiconductor development, and should the focus thus be on expanding international collaboration and markets? And I suppose they do mention US, Europe, etc., but the law of gravity in trade suggests that closer markets might be better. Do you guys think that Southeast Asia can fill some of the can step in the supply chain in some meaningful way? Would anyone like to have a go at that? Todo Sensei, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I raised my hand for the previous question. So,
I'm sorry. Please answer both at the same time.
Yeah. So, TSMC chose Kyushu because actually in Kyushu there's already a cluster of industries like electronic machinery industry and auto parts industry. So that's why once TSMC came, more and more agglomeration happened. So that's a kind of a benefits of economies of scale and industrial clusters. So, but then looking at Rapidus, I'm not sure why Rapidus chose Hokkaido, and Hokkaido has not so much industry cluster compared with the Kyushu and obviously Tokyo and Nagoya. So one concern about Rapidus is lack of industry cluster in that area. So in that sense, that's a one big problem. But my hope is that Hokkaido is, as good place to for skiing and good environment. The Hokkaido provides a very good environment, so that possibly high skilled labor like engineers are willing to relocate to Hokkaido so that they can promote, they can encourage the technology development. That's my hope. And yeah, so that's my answer to the previous question.
It's very helpful, and it's why I've pitched stories on Rapidus immediately, so I can go skiing in Hokkaido. But I would like to come back to the other question, if I'd like to answer it, because I think it is very interesting. If you do look at, let's take the Southeast Asian countries, what opportunities are there practically for them to support the semiconductor supply chain kind of industry or ecosystem?
Well, I'm happy to take that. I mean, look, I think they're already there. I will give you an example. Intel is in both Vietnam and Malaysia, and both governments are aggressively pursuing new opportunities. They've already got a variety of companies, but both countries, just as two examples, have been landing a significant amount of additional investment. And I think, one of the things that we're really seeing is that the industry more broadly is trying to diversify itself into new and different markets. And because we've been in Vietnam for a long time, but also Malaysia, I do think you're seeing other companies finding that attractive, because when you see that one company has been able to be successful, I also give the governments credit, because I think they have been very aggressively pursuing additional investment, because they've, once you have success with one, you understand what it takes to get and land new investment from additional companies as well.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. A question which might be for you again, Bruce, from a person from India in the public service, who asks, among the various public-private partnership initiatives, is the US CHIPS Act the most effective model? Or does its success depend on local conditions? It is. I would love the answer to that, actually.
You guys are going to get me in trouble on this one. I mean, look. So I will say that the rollout of the CHIPS Act has been slower than we have expected, and I wouldn't actually say that the U.S. CHIPS Act is necessarily the model I would look at immediately. I mean, we're very fortunate because we have a footprint across the world in a number of countries, and so we see how the development authorities and the investment authorities in each of these countries operates. And I do think there's some good models out there. I think there are a number of countries that do this really, really well. They make it attractive. They make it easy. They know how to work with you. They give you incentives that are easy to access without significant requirements and baggage that go with it. And so I wouldn't necessarily, if I was comparing, I wouldn't say the CHIPS Act is that has been the most efficient in that regard. Now, with that said, I think there are a lot of companies that want to invest in the United States right now. So the U.S. has benefited from an overall interest in not just of Intel, but across the span of the industry. The companies want to do two things. One is they want to diversify. Two is they probably would have invested in the United States more significantly in the past, but the U.S. never really had an incentive program. Because I should have made this point about the CHIPS Act, but interestingly, the grants in the CHIPS Act are actually not going to turn out to be the most important part of the CHIPS Act. The most significant and important part of the CHIPS Act is the 25% investment tax credit. I mean, frankly, the grants, and I said this in the beginning, that $52.9 billion seems like a huge amount of money. And I think that was spent by the Commerce Department in about the first 10 minutes that they had the money, that they were able to allocate it, because there's this boom of new investment in the United States. But if you had $100 billion investment, 52 is a big number. If you have a $500 million or $500 billion in investment, it actually becomes a very, very small number. And so I think figuring out a system that works and it provides incentives that are able to fill the cost gap, but between the United States and Asia, while doing it in a way that's the most efficient and doesn't rely on the government to decide the size of a grant, is probably a more optimal way to do it.
Thank you very much. Todo Sensei, you have your hand up. Would you like to step in?
So from my perspective, one good thing about CHIPS Act is actually that's not a CHIPS Act, CHIPS and Science Act, right? So they are also focusing on the innovation part. That's very important. So this is a question from India. So I like to emphasize the importance of innovation when we think about the development of semiconductor industry. So in that sense, actually, Japan is following this science part by promoting international research collaboration in the semiconductor industry in Japan. So that's in that sense, CHIPS and Science Act is a model for Japan. Thank you.
We're very, very short on time. There's actually one question that I would ask just to finish up. I think we only have about 3 minutes. So if everyone wants to have a go at this, just 1 minute would be great. We're concentrating very much on what the US and Taiwan, Japan, that bloc will do. But assuming that we see an acceleration or continuation of the trends we've had under previous American presidents, what will China do in response? Will it can it develop a real market? Can SMIC SMIC set up, kind of fix its yield problems? Can it bring in talent? Can it set up rival tool makers who can actually compete in the market eventually? If you guys have an opinion on that to close off, I think that would be valuable.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to start. Look, I think we have seen a remarkable progression in China in terms of the semiconductor industry, right? Obviously these were industries that developed faster in some other places, but I think you've seen substantial progress. And, the one thing that we've learned is, if you put money, smart people, and resources behind something, you can make significant progress. And, I'll just give you an example. On the design side, I would say that China's made huge progress, right? I mean, Huawei is one of the most innovative companies in the world, and you see the progress they've made. The manufacturing side is a little more complicated because some of this machinery, there's a reason that no one in the, anywhere in the world, for example, has been able to recreate the magic. And I really do think that deep EUV lithography is magic what ASML does. It's remarkable. But I definitely would not underestimate the future competitiveness of China, because I think you've seen a very focused effort by the government and a lot of smart engineers trying to address these issues.
Kristy, would you like to add anything just as a closing remark as well?
I think China will be self-sustained in terms of legacy chip, and it will even be able to export or even dumping some of its legacy chip. But in terms of advanced chip, I don't think China is going to do that, not in the next 5, 8, or 10 years.
That's very clear. Todo-sensei, would you like to weigh in as well?
I fully agree with Bruce, and I want to add one thing more, which is China's size. So actually, China's population is huge, so that there are so many good, talented people. So that this kind of a scale effect in innovation can be expected in China. So that we shouldn't underestimate China's innovation capacity.
Thank you very much. I think we are just about out of time, so I'm supposed to wrap this up somehow and summarize what you guys have all said. I'll do it very simply. I think it's a fascinating tale of concentration. You mentioned ASML and their EUV lithography machines, and the fact that then you have these a number of true foundries at the leading edge, and you have it in a very small number of countries, and then you have beneath that you have some tool equipment packaging makers who all occupy niches. I think it's an amazing story of concentration, and I'm not quite sure how you I won't say fix, but how you get past that to the next stage. I have no answer, and I'd like to come back here and discuss it all with you in a year. Bruce promised he'd have a definitive answer on President Trump in a year, so we'll get him back to answer it then. Just to finish up, I'd like to thank, as I should, the Nikkei, in whose building I sit, and the government of Japan, in whose country I also sit, for co-sponsoring this event. Please look out for our next webinar on the Global South. And since we're always looking to improve this series, if you scroll down, you can find a link to the post-webinar satisfaction survey. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take some time to fill that out. So thank you to the panelists one last time. It was great having you guys.
Thanks for having us.